It's relatively easy to find fault with watch brands. Horrendous pricing, out-of-touch marketing, lazy releases, and weird AD games to get a hold of a watch. But there are positive stories out there. Brands that are doing good things that we as consumers are benefiting from. Brands are doing things that show that some do care, do listen, and do want to make better watches for us, for the regular consumer, and for enthusiasts. These are just some of the good things going on right now for some brands and why I think they deserve just a little bit of positive attention. One of the top 5 complaints about Rolex you'll likely hear is something about lack of transparency, lack of openness to the outside world. You would think that applies to Tudor as well, but Tudor did something really positive a few months ago, which I have to praise them for. Tudor opened their doors to media, to YouTubers, and the outside world and said, look, this is how we make our watches. This is where we get our parts. We are not faking. We're not pretending to be 100% in-house. We're showing you how our watch production is a collaborative exercise with hundreds of sub-vendors across Switzerland, Europe, and the rest of the world. Tudor took the public on a tour of EMP, the company that makes the little squares or blanks, as they're called, that are turned into movement components. At EMP, they sandblast, bevel, and engrave those components. They then send them to another company to have them galvanized. They showed us where they made hairsprings and balance wheels at Kennytech. They also went to the company Joseph Baum. They went to Orlux. They went to DTEC, which are Swiss manufacturers of cases and bracelets. The basic case shape, or the blanks as they called, are made by Baum. The detailed milling happens at Orlux, as well as the polishing and the final finishing, and DTEC makes the bracelets and the clasps. Then there's Montremo, who make the dials, and so on, and so on, and so on. Tudor didn't have to do this, but they did. They decided to be open about their product. It signals an honesty and an openness that I think the industry is in dire need of. Decades of snobbish terms like manufacture and in-house have jaded some customers into thinking that the brands lie and obfuscate what they do and where things come from, and a brand of Tudor's size being this level of open is just objectively commendable. Christopher Ward have a lot of smart people on staff. I've met them on a couple of occasions, and the thing that shines through is that as a company, their clear strength is the production side of things. I know that sounds silly since they source a lot of their parts, but if you want to source good stuff, you need to know something about production, and it shines through. They have an incredibly high standard for their watches, and it starts with every component and every supplier. The other thing they're good at is pushing the limits. The Belcanto, the 12X, the Loco, the Lumiere are all watches that have components and designs that push the limits of what you can get at this price point. The new Sealander True GMT is also a big step in the direction of a relatively speaking more affordable True GMT and Power Reserve complication. I'm not a big fan of the actual watch design. I think the open heart is ugly and there's too much going on. But a brand like this making this movement is good for us as consumers. For most of the time, movements and movement innovation is limited to the high end. It's Bulgari, it's Richard Mille, it's Concepto, and others that invest in making those world's thinnest movements. It's some high-end brand that makes a new chronograph escapement like the one you'll find in the AP R&D Royal Oak. But you need low to mid-range brands pushing the boundaries, because if they don't, brands like IWC, Breitling and Rolex and a host of others risk getting complacent. Consider a world where everything under $3,000 is a Sellita or a Seiko movement, 42 hours of power reserve, limited anti-magnetism, no true GMTs. What would happen in that world? Would a brand like Rolex be incentivized to build newer and better movements? No. Neither would IWC or JLC or Omega. Omega's thick Metas movements would still be a better option. Rolex would stick to 70 hours of power reserve, and so on and so on and so on. Or the moment where they try their hand at movement decoration beyond a custom rotor. At that moment, they close the gap to those established brands. And I do believe when Christopher Ward, Yema, and others do these things, it pushes those established brands to up their game, leading to better watches for us. If you want something better to watch, then subscribe to this channel. I know that half of you aren't subscribed, and yet you keep coming back. Click subscribe. It's hugely appreciated. Thank you. In a similar fashion, Frederique Constant are doing good things. Specifically, Frederique Constant have consistently prioritized affordability for complications. The High Life Perpetual Calendar is one of the most affordable perpetual calendars available today. They have a moon phase caliber with 72 hours of power reserve in a dress watch for around $6,000. Relatively speaking, that's really impressive. Their prioritization of value is just generally something that's good for us consumers. For Frederique specifically, they also choose not to be yet another dive watch brand. They have their integrated bracelet watch, but they are dressier and more, let's say, Jaeger-LeCoultre and Patek-esque in their design language, which is also a positive. We've got enough sports watch companies, and a company like this that isn't afraid to serve the dressier segment should also deserve a little bit of praise. Studio Underdog sold about 14,000 watches last year. That's 40% more than Zenith. Let that sink in for a moment. You can hate on Studio Underdog all you want, rising prices, seagull movements, if that's something you choose to hate on, or just colors. It's not for everybody, but it is for 14,000 people at least. And I put them on this list because they make watchmaking fun. Richard, their founder, is a creative guy. He's a fair bit younger than me, and he's very much in touch with an audience of which I am not a part of. We've got a watch industry that prefers to either market watches with about as much panache as a Swiss investment banker and with as much joie de vivre as a mortician. It's dour, it's old-fashioned, and it's often really, really dated. And when it does get wild, it's just so dreadfully mainstream. You are either sponsoring fast boats, fast cars, or fast horses. But Studio Underdog are doing a little bit of what worked with the Moonswatch. It's color, it's fun, it's lightheartedness, and it works. It's drawing in 14,000 customers, and I'm convinced that they are a brand that are bringing in new watch enthusiasts and young people to the world of watches. I understand why a 22-year-old doesn't fall head over heels in love with a monoface reverso, but does with a goofy panda. We need this kind of energy in the industry to keep the industry fresh. We need brands like these that stuffy old farts hate on, because the more stuffy farts and snobs hate on these watches, the more appealing they will be to people that want to be the opposite. It's just plain healthy for this approach in the industry. I'm not a big fan of private equity. I've worked in private equity held firms. I know how they operate. But with Breitling and George Kern, it's not all bad being part of private equity. Breitling are doing several things that I think are worth calling out. They are trying to revive Universal Genève. It will be high-end and unaffordable for most, but they're taking it seriously. UG are a brand that have been languishing in irrelevance in the hands of a Hong Kong-based owner, and bringing them into the hands of someone that actually wants to do something with the brand is hugely consequential. The acquisition of Gallet to make a more affordable offering as well is huger than you might think. You have to remember that the dominant logic at the moment is that the Swiss should get out of the affordable space and get into the luxury space. Throwing a value play into the mix is a little bit counter to what would be considered wise business these days. But they're doing it. They are serving the value space, and that's always a plus. I think there's much more money on that table than Swiss brands realize. I also heard an interview with George Kern where he said raising prices without improving the product is bad for business. I swear to Murgatroyd, I shouted at the TV when I heard that. It was like, ding, 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 give this man a prize. And the fact is, although Breitling isn't cheap, every time they've updated a watch, they've raised the bar to match the price. The Top Time B31 is a good example of how they didn't just throw in a bog standard movement into their new sports watch. They got together with AMT and made a really, really good highly spec movement to compete against similarly priced watches from competitors like IWC. You might think that Breitling are expensive, but they're not cutting corners. They're not just jacking up prices. The product from Breitling does consistently get better, and I think customers notice. Breitling is just way more compelling than it was 5 or 10 years ago. If you saw my video review of the Hydro Conquest, you'll know that Longines bought me chocolates. Longines are just making good watches at the moment at very reasonable prices. Simple as. Longines Spirit Zulu Time, Hydro Conquest GMT, the 5 Hz Ultrachron for the old school enthusiast. They've got a solid sports watch in the Conquest. They've got, in my view, a field watch in the Spirit that is vastly superior to the more expensive Tudor Ranger. They've got decent movements, they've got lots of power reserve, they've got solid build quality, great finish. Do they get some of their things made or finished in a factory in Thailand? Maybe, I don't care. The reality is there aren't a lot of established Swiss brands that care about the value space, but Longines is one that does. Hamilton have almost always been a brand associated with movies, and I think their first movie association was before World War II. But it's the Christopher Nolan movies that most people know about, especially Interstellar and The Murph. The thing I've taken a liking to recently is their effort to embed themselves in gaming. Death Stranding, Call of Duty, Resident Evil. It's just cool, and just like Studio Underdog, gaming is a way of connecting with a younger and, importantly, a new audience. The power of these kind of collabs is much bigger than you would think. I guarantee you that some Twitch streamer that would otherwise maybe have chosen an Apple Watch or maybe a G-Shock is now considering a Hamilton Cocky because of the Call of Duty or Resident Evil collab. Now all I need is for Hamilton to make a watch collab that matches with my low execution Torn Jet upper, double bound, heat smash, wall explosion, floor break 48-second combo for 155 damage. God rank if you're curious. NASA also needs a mention. Sure, they don't make watches, but it's been a while since someone mentioned the moon and watches, and it almost never ever comes up, especially not from Omega. So I'm just glad that Omega now has something to talk about for a change. I was really starting to miss conversations about the moon and watches. Maybe if we're lucky, we'll also get a new Moonswatch. Fingers crossed. Max Buser and friends make expensive watches. They don't make a lot of them either. This is high horology, almost piece unique territory with a price tag that scares off 99.9% of people on the planet. Every now and again, though, MB&F allow regular people to get a whiff of what they do for a whole lot less and with an equal playing field for access. No AD games, no waiting in line. You sign up for a raffle, and if your name is randomly selected, boom, you get to buy a Mad Edition watch. I love that there's a high-end brand that doesn't fully embrace snobbishness and arrogance. I love that they make a little bit of what they can do accessible to people with, relatively speaking, normal levels of wealth. It signals humility and an openness that I find really appealing. It goes against that insular nature of the Swiss watch industry, and it just makes things so much more approachable. It shapes the relationship with customers and is really positively inclusive. I still have my questions about AP's CEO and their new board. Their board of directors is almost exclusively made up of people that have no experience in the watch industry. That is a choice that could turn out to be one of the wisest ever made or one of the dumbest. It's literally a bold strategy, Cotton. But I'm not critical for the sake of being critical. There are things Ilaria Resta has said and done that I think need praise. One, she has acknowledged that the Swiss watch industry is a little bit incompetent. It's insular, deals with suppliers is made with handshakes, and when demand craters, the current model leaves the suppliers holding the bag. She admits that this isn't fair to the suppliers, it's damaging for the brands, and shines a light on an industry that, although technically very skilled, is just a bit backwards in a whole lot of other ways. She wants to change that, and that could lead to more robust businesses and a healthier industry if others follow suit. She has also openly stated that the watch industry barely understands young people or women. She hasn't said it directly, but I'm sure she's not a person who believes in the mantra of shrink it and pink it. A brand like AP thinking about how to get new, younger, and female customers into their stores will serve to grow the industry. She's also taken steps to increase the pace of innovation, both in terms of design, but also in terms of technology. Watch brands are not necessarily known for being fast-moving. Cases, bracelets, and movements need to be in use for years to justify the investments that go into them. Completely revamping lineups every year is prohibitive, so instead it's dial updates and other things that are more manageable as seasonal changes. And watches, they aren't fashion. They shouldn't move like fashion with constant revamps from season to season. But some of that pace, some of that energy is necessary to stay relevant. The fact is, we're a world of people that these days have the attention span of a goldfish. You have to embrace newness and hype, and you need to adapt faster. If something isn't working, you need to adjust now and not spend 3 years considering whether or not you should lose the numerals on a dial. It just doesn't work. Adjust, adapt, and she's signaling that. And it's so needed. It's early days, but under the previous CEO, Jean-Marc, from 2017 to 2025, Panerai shifted from being a tool, forward enthusiast brand to being an overly priced lifestyle brand that attempted to cater to the more mainstream customer. He stopped in 2025, just before Watches and Wonders, and this year at Watches and Wonders, their watch lineup had additions of much more classic tool-forward luminors. It wasn't a complete catalog revamp, but it was a return to the old-school Panerai, with less pandering to the generic consumer and more focus on the core Paneristi kind of customer. Seeing Richemont and Panerai move away from generic lifestyle and leaning more heavily into what makes Panerai special is a big plus. It's early days, and with only Watches and Wonders as a gauge, there's not enough to conclude that it's a trend, but it was a positive first data point. Like I said, to start off with, criticizing is easy for us to do. We can always find something to hate on, but here I called out some of the good things happening that are worth calling out. Do you also have examples of positive steps brands are taking, decisions they've made that you applaud. Share them in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.